On today's World Insight, how Japan is reacting to the Biden administration blocking U.S. steel takeover bid, and how this move will affect jobs, innovation and foreign investment in America.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. On Tuesday, Nippon Steel held a press conference in Tokyo to announce that the company and the U.S. Steel have jointly filed a federal lawsuit challenging the Biden administration's decision to block a proposed nearly $15 billion US deal for Nippon to acquire Pittsburgh-based U.S. Steel. According to Japanese media reports, this marks the very first time a major Japanese corporation has sued a sitting U.S. president. What is driving this lawsuit and how could it impact the investment environment and also the business environment in the United States and the business relations the U.S. has with its allies and beyond? On all of these questions, let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in the U.S., William Lee, Chief Economist at the Milken Institute. In Tokyo, Benoit Chartrand, Faculty Lecturer in the Department of Political Science and International Affairs at Temple University. Welcome to the program, both of you gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us. Now, Mr. Chartrand, tell us more about how the Japanese society and also the business community is shall I say, digesting the latest information about the U.S. president blocking the takeover by Nippon Steel of the U.S. Steel Company?
Yeah, so I don't think the business community in Japan is digesting this news very well. It had been a few months that we had seen the signs, the signals had started to come out that it was likely that the Biden administration was going to block the sale of U.S. Steel to Nippon Steel. But despite the fact that this was not a completely unexpected decision, it really hasn't gone down very well. Not only both U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel have vowed to fight the decision by the Biden administration, but also the business community in Japan is very frustrated, including Keidanren, which is the biggest business lobby in Japan. The Japanese government is not happy about that. I was also looking at the Japanese media today and yesterday, and there's quite a lot of op-eds on that news that are criticizing the move by the Biden administration. So yeah, it hasn't been a very good week, let's say, for U.S.-Japan business relations, and we're going to see the fallout of this news in the next couple of weeks. But certainly, it's going to be interesting to watch the fight because they've both decided. When I say both, I mean both U.S. Steel and Nippon Steel have decided to fight through lawsuits. So we'll see where that goes.
Mr. Lee, tell us more about how do you see the reasons behind the decision?
It was a very surprising decision based on the economics of the matter. It made a lot of sense for Nippon Steel to do what it was proposing to U.S. Steel, which is to say we are proposing to not just have ownership, but we want to improve U.S. Steel to the point where it can be a competitive force in the world economy. It can be a competitive steelmaker vis-a-vis all the other major steelmakers in the world. And to turn that deal down was a surprise to many people here in the United States. Now, it was understandable. People expected President Biden to be against it. And what was somewhat surprising also is that President Trump chimed in and said, I also feel that the U.S. Steel should be purely owned by U.S. citizens and not owned or controlled by foreign entities. That also came as somewhat a surprise because President Trump, one thing about the Make America Great agenda that he has campaigned on for so long is to be very inviting, for the U.S. to be very inviting for foreign investment. And this was one example where he had a chance to say, you could have an opportunity as an ally to the U.S. Japan is one of the U.S.'s closest allies, to come to the U.S. and invest in an American firm and make it better again. That's the kind of proposal that I expected President Trump to champion. But unfortunately, the politics and the name U.S. Steel has a lot of history to it. And it was unfortunate that this particular example was the one that was so prominently made into a test case And in some ways, I must say the U.S. political system failed the test.
Mr. Lee, tell us more about these reasons given by the Biden administration about blocking the deal. Nippon U.S. Steel is a so-called U.S. steelmaker under foreign control and also so-called threat of national security and critical supply chains. Do you think these reasons given by the Biden administration stand their grounds?
The Committee on Foreign Investment in the U.S., the CFIUS committee, was very undecided about whether or not this was a threat to national security. So already there was some uncertainty as whether there was any real national security issue at stake. But President Biden chose to make it into one by saying, no, it has to be, the U.S. Steel has to be controlled by U.S. But we all feel, who are sort of know what motivates President Biden, is that he wanted to protect union jobs, not jobs for Americans, but jobs for unionized Americans. And unionized Americans represent less than 15% of the workforce of the United States. But nevertheless, President Biden has made his career, political career, out of being a pro-union politician.
It's about 800,000 strong, something like that.
It is one of the most powerful unions in the United States, no question about it. The United Steelworkers Union not only is powerful, but it also controls a lot of steel companies in the sense that Cleveland Cliffs, which is the American competitor, United Steelworkers were able to say to Cleveland Cliffs, we will grant you the right to bid, which we own. We, the union, own that right to bid, meaning anyone can come and bid on a company, but usually you buy parts of the company, you have to divest others. But by allowing the union to come in and present Cleveland Cliffs with this gift of right to bid, Cleveland Cliff can buy the entirety of U.S. Steel without having to diversify. And so that was a tremendous bargaining edge that Cleveland Cliffs has over any other competitor because the union sided with Cleveland Cliffs, because Cleveland Cliffs is also a very pro-union shop.
Mr. Ardi Charton, in Japan, where you are, how people are articulating the reasons given by the Biden administration for blocking the deal?
The biggest disappointment is really that this was not basically, this was not a purely economic decision. It was not a business decision because, as Bill was saying a minute ago, this would have been good for U.S. Steel. This would have brought new investments to the United States. Nippon Steel had promised to improve, upgrade their factories in the United States. So purely in terms of economics, in terms of business, this made sense. So this is why, from the perspective of Japan, it is perceived that the Biden administration allowed politics to seep into an area where there should not have been politics.
We remember just a few weeks ago, President-elect Trump, together with the SoftBank chairman, was shaking hands with one another, talking about investing in the United States with 100 or 200 billion US dollars, putting that at the backdrop and the big smiles on both faces. This seems to be quite an interesting phenomenon popping up just within a few weeks' time.
Yeah, and let's remember, the United States is a place where foreign investors from all over the world, UK, Canada, and Asia, have found a good home and a good fertile field for investments, as SoftBank being the latest example of that. And for this to be such a counterexample, such a difficult one, is going to make life very difficult now for future foreign investors, unless they can see through it and realize this truly is a political game where the outgoing president wanted to protect union jobs. President Trump didn't want to, prior to his election, favor the sale of the iconic U.S. Steel to a foreign investor, and which represents really, truly bad timing in terms of the timing of the deal. Those two circumstances are very special cases and doesn't represent the investment opportunities that we have in the United States for foreigners.
What actually has been the political factors shifts in the United States, and whether the President-elect Trump can be following some of the footsteps of the traditional Republican Party practices? Well,
actually, the trend that we see in the United States is toward less and less unionized labor. And as you see from the backers of President Trump, the high-tech Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who have started so many businesses that are high-paying and high-tech, those companies tend not to be unionized. Even Amazon, which where unions have attempted to make inroads, have failed because essentially the high-tech entrepreneurs are saying, look, we are treating our workers better than any union is able to help them. And so in that sense, the real disruptive trend in the United States is the continued decline in unionized labor. And that what we see with President Biden is a last desperate ditch effort to say, I will save union jobs, not American jobs, but union jobs. And I think that's the picture that is being clearly made for the world to see. And I think, investors will see that is an American enclave of small parts of the labor force that's trying to retain its power, whereas the bulk of the workforce is really eager for capital from all over the world, including United States domestic investors, to try to revitalize American industry to the point where we can be a much more competitive force in the world.
Oh, well, I fully agree with Bill on this matter when it comes to the political landscape in the United States. We've seen certain shifts in the last few years, and I do think indeed that these shifts are going to be reflected as well in the Trump administration. So yeah, basically these are my thoughts on what he just said.
Whether traditional heavy industries such as the steel companies are still the core or the strength of the U.S. economy is very debatable. From where you are in Japan, how people are reading the U.S. Structural changes in its economy and vis-a-vis the public rhetorics, for example, when you have something called the U.S. in front of the topic, in front of the title of your company, it means something else. Mr. Ardi Chaton.
No, absolutely. Well, we have seen certainly over the last few years, especially in the case of when the first administration by Trump, a desire to bring back, for example, manufacturing jobs to the United States. Well, he has found that this was more difficult to do. A lot of these jobs, and this is not only the case in the United States, they have moved to countries where labor workforce is cheaper. So these moves have largely failed in the United States in the case of the Trump administration. Now we have seen also over the last few years some efforts to have a more of a tech-driven economy. And as Bill was saying earlier, innovation is a very important part of the American economy. So we're likely to see that again in the next few years. And from Japan, of course, this is why we're seeing a lot of desires for continued investments in the United States, and why we saw, for example, Son Masayoshi, who is the head of SoftBank in Japan, recently promising to invest $100 billion in the American economy in terms of high tech, which is still seen again as an important market for Japanese companies.
Mr. Lee?
Well, let's remember also that manufacturing itself can also be high or low tech, can be labor intensive or capital intensive, depending on the kind of technology that's put in place. Mike Milken, my boss, is fond of saying, Bill, do you realize it's cheaper to make Nike sneakers in Atlanta, Georgia than in China, because of if you have the right technology and the different mix of capital versus labor? And that's a revealing story that says, depending upon where what you're rich in, if you're rich in a lot of cheap labor, you will employ a lot of cheap labor. If you're rich in a lot of capital and skilled labor, you will employ that capital and skilled labor in a way that produces goods in the lowest cost. And that's what capitalism and market system is all about. But in terms of high-tech manufacturing in the United States, Tesla is a great example of where you can have high-tech and heavy-duty manufacturing.
The Nippon Nippon Steel, according to media reports at least, suggested it's promised that once it's acquired the U.S. Steel, it would apply some of the latest technologies it has into the U.S. Steel and the operation. How is that technology part is being viewed right now and discussed? Because it's certainly not just about a steel company. It could be about clean energy. It could be about electronic vehicles. It could be about all the other factors of the economy in terms of latest technology.
What we've seen with successful companies around the world, both American companies, Asian companies, European companies, is that the way to do business now is to create the product close to your market. So Japanese cars have been producing in the U.S. for decades now. German manufacturers, the BMW, X5 is exclusively made in South Carolina for worldwide distribution. So I think Nippon Steel represents one of the state-of-the-art companies in steel manufacturing, has shown to be competitive around the world, and the U.S. is welcoming that new technology infusion. And instead, Cleveland-Cliffs is also a specialist in steel making, but with a different technology. And the fear is that Cleveland-Cliff technology may actually create a monopoly position by acquiring U.S. Steel so that it will not be able to allow the kind of competition that we need in the United States to keep steel prices low. Now, the only hope for competition then is going to be coming from abroad, from Nippon Steel, from China steelmakers and Korean steelmakers. Now, that's where this awful word tariff starts to come in, right? Will the United States try to protect this monopolistic company that Cleveland-Cliffs U.S. Steel might become by imposing tariffs and preventing the kind of global competition that really will keep prices down? That's yet to be seen. But that's one of the dangers of the deal that's going in place right now.
That's one of the key principal issues here, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And I think President Trump will also see through that as well, because I think one thing that he knows he's got to do is lower the cost of living for American citizens and for people around the world. And the only way to do that is to allow competition to take place. He got elected by an electorate that said, we can't make ends meet anymore. The cost of living is way too high. And one of his great promises is not only drill, baby, drill to the lower energy costs, but he's also going to have to lower the cost of basic raw materials like steel.
How does America as a whole, if I could ask this way, see its competitive edge? Is it about maintaining the name of U.S., or is it about technology, or is it about the so-called national security? So what is there a shared view? As
usual, I get questions from you that really cut to the heart of the issues of the United States, that difficulty issues that Americans are facing. The general picture for the United States and manufacturing in particular is that we want the best technologies available from anywhere and the best people available from anywhere. But there are a few special companies in the United States. One of them happens to be U.S. Steel, that has such a history that the name owned by Americans trumps any kind of technological advantage that a foreign investor might bring to the picture. And unfortunately, for that company, U.S. workers and U.S. citizens are willing to say, we're going to live with a less efficient, less technologically advanced company because of American pride. And that, unfortunately, is a pocket that represents a historical situation which has a very special case to it, and that you don't find in any other company.
In the Japan specifically, they still view the U.S. market and its competitive edge in a very positive light, which is why this decision of the Biden administration, while it is an unfortunate decision and while it is a decision that has been very negatively perceived in Japan, not only by the business community, but also by the political community, it is not expected that it is going to affect long-term investment by Japan in the United States. So yes, the perceptions of the United States as a market, as a market of innovation, as a stable market, is still, for the moment, still relatively intact. The U.S. is a very important market. Japan is the largest investor in the United States. It has been the largest investor, in fact, since 2019. And in the last few years, we have seen fewer investments of Japan in markets like China, for example. So the United States has been perceived as even more important from the perspective of Japanese businesses. We mentioned earlier the SoftBank investments, for example. This is just one recent example of major Japanese investments in the United States. So that has been generally in the last few days. I've monitored closely the reaction of the business community. And what most businesses are saying here is that they want to continue to invest in the United States. Most of them, and this is something that Bill raised earlier, but most of them are seeing this as more of a one-off decision, something that is inherently political and specific to the very case, and that is not likely to affect the greater trends of Japanese investments. But it doesn't mean that some investors might not try to hedge in their investments in the future, hedge their bets by also trying to invest in other markets.
We saw quite mixed pictures even about the president-elect Trump's policy. How predictable do you think the U.S. situation can be for international investors?
Actually, I have talked to quite a number of prospective investors.
I'm sure you do.
In the United States. And my one suggestion to everybody is read Trump's book, right? The Art of the Deal. He actually prides himself on being unpredictable. That is his strength. But the one thing you do know that he tries every time is the initial offer is not the same as the final offer. The initial tariff rate will not be the same as the final tariff rate, depending upon what deal you make. And that's the one thing you can depend on. And I think that President Trump has made it very clear the MAGA agenda, Make America Great agenda, is get more jobs, high-paying jobs into U.S. citizens, make sure our supply chains are protected, and make sure that globalization, as it was, in the 1990s and early 2000s, gets reshaped into regionalization. The regionalization of trade is probably going to be the hallmark of the Trump administration going forward. Individual deals will be the hallmark of the Trump administration going forward. We will not have single deals for everybody. And so the ability to appeal decisions will be something that all businesses will be keeping in mind. And no matter what the initial rulings are, is always the appeal. And what you get on appeal is never going to be made public. So I think that the behind the scenes deals are going to be a very important factor. And as Ben knows, in Asia, that's the way Asian businesses do business, is never a big public deal. It's always what's going on behind the scenes.
Generally, the mood over the last couple of years in Japan, and I mentioned it in my previous comment, has been to see the United States as a desirable investment destination. Although, of course, with the Trump administration coming in 2 weeks now, there might be some frictions emerging as we saw during the first Trump administration regarding, for example, American troops in Japan and such issues like this. So it's going to be very interesting to observe the direction of their relationship and the business relationship over the next 4 years.
We understand there are some last-minute actions by the Biden administration, Mr. Lee, for different political and reasons. How do you see those decisions and actions will play out when there is an incoming administration that have very different views from the earlier ones, but in this case, on the Nippon Steel and the U.S. Steel, quite similar views, at least for now?
President Biden's objective was to seal and protect unionized jobs as much as he can. That's the hallmark of the Biden trademark, union jobs. I think the similarity ends right there because American jobs is what President Trump wants to protect, not necessarily just unionized jobs. And if he can get more jobs for other Americans, that will be the wedge that will differentiate the two on this deal. If Nippon Steel can assure President Trump and the new administration that American jobs and American cost of living will be much better off with the Nippon deal than Cleveland-Cliffs, I think there's hope for that some compromise to be made. And as you say, a lot of last-minute moves by President Biden to seal in the woke agenda that he's been championing for the last 4 years. And unfortunately, a lot of these administrative actions will have to be redone. That'll just take time. And time is what President Trump doesn't have, because this is his last administration. He's got about 100 days to get as much as he can done, because after that, Congress is going to worry about the next elections, as you know, and the minds will be on the next election in 2028.
How significant this case study will be for people to understand what kind of U.S. economy and what kinds of U.S. investment environment will be for years to come. Mr. Arti Chartrand and later Mr. Li, please.
This blocking or this event is going to be seen or studied for a long time, because it's one of the most significant actions in terms of blocking a takeover of an American company, and in terms of a Japanese company overtaking or taking over an American company. This would have been one of the largest deals in U.S. Japan history. So of course it is significant. There's going to be a lot of discussions over the repercussions, long-term, short-term repercussions. And as I mentioned previously, I think even though this is an unfortunate setback, all signs are pointing, at least so far in the case of Japan, in the direction of a desire to continue to expand business relationship, and especially continue to invest at a very high rate in the United States market.
Yeah. Mr. Li.
If I were to be teaching in business school and write up this as a case study, it's going to be a lesson in bad timing and bad targets, because an iconic target like U.S. Steel should not be acquired during an election year. And if you're going to acquire it, then you need to frame the deal in a way that becomes pro-American, pro-jobs, pro-competition. And those are the things that Nippon Steel failed to do. And in fact, the head of Nippon Steel said, "What a terrible time for me to enter into this deal during an election year, but this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that I couldn't pass up." And that was the gamble he took, and unfortunately, he's facing a lot of headwinds now.
William Li and Benoit Arti Chartrand, thank you so much for both of your input and insights. Appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.